When you got back from the Middle East and from Russia in June of 1974, how did you see your position in terms of impeachment?
Well, I guess first I saw it through the eyes of others. Things seemed to be better. The media seemed to be less vicious than usual, and some were even quite objective. Our own people in the Congress felt that the vote count was going fairly well, and the mood was simply better. But some way I didn't share that. I just had an intuition that beneath the surface things were not going that well. Despite the fact that we had had good publicity out of the Middle East and fair publicity even out of the visit to the Soviet Union. And I guess I can put my finger on it in a couple of ways. You know, politicians, I guess like women, and women politicians particularly would have it, we just have intuition, sixth sense. I remember so well in 1948, I campaigned around the country as a young congressman for the Dewey ticket. He was going to win by a landslide. Everybody said he was going to win. I just sensed it wasn't going right. And I remember telling an editorial meeting of the Kansas City Star about 3 weeks before that I didn't feel good about it. They thought I was crazy. Well, it doesn't show that I'm so smart, but I sensed it. In this case, I think I was worried for reasons. First, for the reverse reason, that we were doing better. I knew that if the opposition felt we were doing better, they would panic. And by panicking, that meant bad news for us. They could not afford, I'm referring now to the partisan Democrats who were out to get me, of course, and the media. They could not afford to fail now. Millions of dollars had been spent on the Watergate investigation. They had a vested interest in conviction. And so under the circumstances, as they saw the news get better, they had to do more to bring me down. And then something had happened while I was in the Soviet Union. Here I was negotiating with Brezhnev about arms control and missiles and the rest, and a story came out of Washington to the effect that Rodino, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, had made a comment which he didn't expect to be published, but which revealed something, in which he said that all 27 members of the Judiciary Committee, the Democrats, were going to vote for impeachment. This is before the hearings were even held. And so that concerned me. I was concerned, too, by the fact that my political position not being as strong as it was, that maybe there would be softness in the Republican ranks. But all of these things caused me to worry. And then another factor. I knew that with the opposition worrying, they'd put in their first team, and believe me, they did. Carl Albert, the Speaker of the House, is a very fine man. We'd come to Congress together. He was very bipartisan, supporting me on my Vietnam and other issues and so forth. But he was not partisan enough. And so they gave the job to Tip O'Neill, who was the majority leader. Now, I've known every speaker since World War II, including Sam Rayburn, one of the great ones. I would say that Tip O'Neill is certainly one of the ablest, but without question, he is the most ruthless and most partisan speaker we have had in my lifetime. The only time he's bipartisan is when it will serve his partisan interests. He plays hardball. He doesn't know what a softball is. So under the circumstances, when I heard that he was taking over, shaping up the Democrats, I knew that we were in trouble. Those are the things that worried me before going to California. And yet, I must say, on the 12th of July, just before taking off for California, we had a bill signing ceremony in the Oval Office, and Jerry Ford came up to me afterwards, and he's usually not an overly optimistic type, although he's not the pessimistic type either, but he said, look, he said, we got this thing made. We're going to win by over 50 votes in the House. And then Bryce Harlow, who was a real professional, served with Eisenhower, served with me as well, came up, said, you've got it won, boss. Well, I felt pretty good, and yet some way it didn't feel right.
Excuse me, Frank, I have to interrupt. I'm sorry, I've got a key light problem on Franklin with corrected 30 seconds. Keep the tapes rolling. On the two shot, he's just much darker than the president. We must have lost the key somewhere. How about opening the barn door on the one on this side?
media thing?
Which I'm about to ask. That they thought
Huh?
they said it was that they treated it like a microscope, but in fact they treated it like a proctoscope.
Tape still rolling and locked. Everybody in position? Is that ladder out of the way now? Yeah. Okay, Frank, start on 5-second countdown and cue Frank.
That was a good line. That's your line.
Here we go, 5.
You say that the opponents were the partisan Democrats in the media. It's easy to understand why the partisan Democrats were the opponents, but why were the media the opponents?
Well, my fights with the media, of course, are legendary. It goes back a long time, from the time I started with the Hiss case, the Fund crisis, coming back after defeat when they wrote me off and read them off. I had read them off after 1962. So consequently, it is sort of assumed that the media and I are not friends, that we're always adversaries. Now, I think we've got to put that into context. First, it is not personal. I have some good personal friends in the media. It is not general. There are some people in the media that I respect, that I think are objective, single standard type reporters. But on the other hand, I would have to say that the great majority of those in the media in the Washington press corps, both television and print media, were against me. They have been in the past, they were before Watergate, and of course even more so during Watergate. Now the reasons for that, I think, are several. One is I'm a conservative, and an effective conservative in their view, and they are liberal. I'm speaking of those that are against me. The second reason goes to the war. We just totally disagreed on the war. I was insisting on and worked for peace with honor, and they wanted peace at any price. They didn't think that at that point we should even continue to try to get peace with honor. And then I think there was this subtle reason, the subtle reason that in 1972, when the country was voting for me 62%, 78% of the Washington media heavyweights were for McGovern. I had beaten them, and beaten them very badly. They knew that after the election that I would owe them nothing but a good kick in the seat of the pants. I don't think they felt that I was going to repress them, but on the other hand, they would like to see that verdict of 1972 reversed. And so what happened was, along came Watergate. They had the big guns, but we passed them the ammunition, and they proceeded to shoot it right back at us. Now, I know that I've talked to people in the media, you know, we do talk on occasion, and they say, but it's the responsibility of the media to look at government generally, and particularly at the president, with a microscope. I don't mind a microscope, but boy, when they use a proctoscope, that's going too far.
You use the example. You use the example of peace with honor versus peace at any price. A lot of the people in the media, a lot of people would say that that's a quintessential Nixonism, to equate the two as if the opposite of what you wanted, peace with honor, was peace with any price, which sounds sort of furtive and like appeasement, dishonorable, peace with honor as opposed to dishonor. Their argument would be that it was an unfortunate, unhappy war which was unwinnable, that our commitment was wrong, and that the honorable thing to do precisely was to cut our losses in a coherent way and pull out. They would say that that's a kind of devious setup on your part, and that's one of the reasons throughout your career why they've opposed you. Do you see any of that?
No, they're absolutely wrong, and history shows that they're wrong. What happened in Vietnam? They felt that we should bug out. I always knew that if we bugged out of Vietnam, if we failed to prevail there, and the communists came in, first that it would be a disaster, that a bloodbath would come to all of Southeast Asia, and that's happened. And second, that it would be harmful to the United States and other parts of the world. And third, it would encourage the Soviet Union to engage in aggression in other places as well, and that's happened. So I would say, when I was for peace with honor, I meant by that, give the South Vietnamese, which we did through the Paris Peace Agreement, a chance to survive on their own, but not to bug out simply because the war had become unpopular. I must say I respect their right to disagree with me. But on this, I think that my position has been vindicated by what's happened.
This isn't really a question of position, though. Do you see that in terminological terms, to say that you were for peace with honor implies that anybody who wasn't with you was somehow dishonorable or for peace with dishonor, even if peace was a desirable end, and that this was the kind of thing that got their back up in dealing with you?
Maybe it got their back up, but in my view, to let down an ally and to allow a bloodbath to occur, that was dishonor, and I repeat it right now.
You flew to San Clemente in mid-July. What did you expect to do on that trip?
Well, I thought we would have an opportunity on that trip to sort of catch our breath after the visit to the Soviet Union and the rather intense pressures that we had been under. I knew, too, that the Judiciary Committee was going to begin its hearings shortly, its public hearings, and we had to be prepared for that. So under the circumstances, it was a good time for us to take a rest and to look at things from afar in a more objective way.
Getting back to what we were just talking about, the media. On one of my favorite 10-point scales, a 10-point bipartisan scale, how much would you say, in terms of the Democrats in Congress and the media, that there was a genuinely disinterested bipartisan element, or not even bipartisan, that they genuinely felt that Watergate was a serious abuse, that it needed to be investigated, and that the best way to investigate it was through an impeachment proceeding? How much was there that pristine devotion to finding out what the president knew and when he knew it? How much was partisan determination that it had gone too far and they had to get rid of you or otherwise they would suffer?
It was a combination of both. Let me say, I realize that there were some in the media and some in the Congress who felt that for a variety of reasons, because they had disagreed with me in Vietnam, because they thought I was too strong in terms of what I was going to do in the second term, that they felt that it was very important to get me out of there. Let me make it clear as to why they were concerned. I had not held any punches back. I made it clear after the election that with the war out of the way, having won by 62%, I had a mandate. I was going to reorganize the government. I was going to cut down on the bureaucrats. I was going to return more power to the states and the people. I was going to shape up the place. They knew that. The media knew it. The bureaucracy knew it. The elitists knew it. The establishment knew it. They didn't like it. And so under the circumstances, I can understand why, whatever their devotion to being honorable and so forth are concerned, those partisan instincts might prevail. But in fairness, of course there were some who weren't partisan at all. They just thought I should be out because they thought I should never have been in.
But if you had to guess a percentage of people who were in it for the partisan advantage or because they felt they had to get rid of you in order to justify themselves, as opposed to the people who genuinely thought it was an appalling thing and that you should be removed because of it, what would be the percentage in the media and the Congress?
I would say that in just lumping them all together, that in the media it was perhaps about 75% that just welcomed the opportunity to get me out of there. About 25% who felt had this pristine motive that you referred to. In the Congress, perhaps 50-50.
When did you learn that John Ehrlichman had been convicted for the Ellsberg break-in?
On the flight to California. I remember it was a very shattering bit of news to get on that plane flight. Here, Ehrlichman had been convicted, and I thought back as to how unfair life is, how terribly unfair. Here's Daniel Ellsberg. Daniel Ellsberg had illegally taken thousands of pages of documents, secret documents, from the Pentagon. He had turned them over to the New York Times. They were published in the New York Times, the so-called Pentagon Papers. As a result of their publications, I know that it encouraged the enemy. that it slowed down our negotiations to end the war and cost thousands of American lives. John Ehrlichman had the responsibility, along with those who worked with him, to attempt to expose this man, to see that he was brought to justice, but also to discourage others from doing likewise and to be sure that this man did not do something else in the future. Now, I could never understand why they thought that going into his psychiatrist's office would give them some information that would be useful, and yet that's assuming that's debatable. But they did it certainly with the intention probably of recognizing he had done something that was illegal. He had said he was going to do more, which he had, and we had to find out in order to do our job, which was to not only end the war, but to carry on an effective foreign policy. And after all that, what happens? Here, John Ehrlichman's going to prison. Daniel Ellsberg not only goes free, he's made a hero in the media and a hero on college campuses all over the country. Now, that's just wrong.
John Ehrlichman has since, so you think that Ehrlichman got a bum rap?
Yes, I do.
He's since written a book in which, among other things, he claims that you had a serious drinking problem. He claims that you manipulated the Watergate period to make yourself look good, to position yourself well. How did, when he resigned, you said that he was one of the two finest public servants it had ever been your privilege to know. How do you feel about him today?
I felt that then about his public service. I still feel that. And I understand why he, or Bob Haldeman for that matter, to a lesser degree, after having to go to prison, they felt unjustifiably and so forth, after all that they had done, how they would be bitter. I understand it.
How do you feel about John Dean in 25 words or less today?
I don't need 25 words. He did what he did to save himself, and I understand that.
In your memoirs, you quote your daughter Tricia's. In your memoirs, you quote your daughter Tricia's own diary about the arrival at San Clemente and a walk she and her husband took around the golf course. Can you tell that story?
Well, the plane finally landed in San Clemente. I was already a bit down because of hearing the news about Ehrlichman's conviction. And I went into the house, and we had a pleasant dinner. It was a beautiful day, beautiful time, and Eddie and Tricia went out for a walk. When they came back in, they were rather subdued. They didn't tell me why. I learned later why. Right next to my house in San Clemente, Bob Applenknop owned the property, and some friends out there, they called them Friends of the President, had built a 3-hole golf course. And Eddie and Tricia went out to walk on the golf course. It was all grown up with weeds. There were cattails growing in the sand traps. And Tricia was very, very depressed about that. I later told her, when she told me about it, I said, you know, in politics, friendship is a very fleeting thing. Unless you can do something for somebody or something to them, the friendships evaporate very quickly. Very few stick around. It was obvious that those who had been friends, who helped to build that golf course, felt that I could do nothing for them and nothing to them. That was an indication of how power goes away.
Isn't that a terribly empty and even cynical attitude, that politics is only what you can do to or for people?
Well, there are some saving graces, however. I said that that is generally the case, but there are also some others who were with you through thick and thin, and those are the ones that you remember. But I've often written, incidentally, after campaigns, and I've been in so many over the years, I write to the winners, but I also write to the losers, because having lost, I know that's when you appreciate it. And in every letter I write to the losers, I said, you know, when you win, everybody's your friend. When you lose, you find out who your true friends are. Just count me in the latter.
Did you find out in Watergate who your true friends are?
Oh, yes.
Did you have many major disappointments or many major surprises in terms of who weren't or who were your real friends?
Not particularly, no. No, let me say that it was very difficult to remain a Nixon friend after Watergate. After all, while the polls showed we still had maybe 25 to 30% support, we have to understand that I was simply an unpopular figure. And people generally don't want to stick out their necks for somebody who's down. We're all that way to an extent.
What was your reaction?
The reason I am not that way is that having been down, I can understand people that are also down. I want to help them. But a lot of people just only play winners. That's particularly true in what I call the Wall Street crowd. Douglas MacArthur often told me that. He said, these people here, Mr. Vice President, they are the coldest, most cynical people in the world. They aren't conservative, they aren't liberal. They're just for whoever happens to be on top.
What was your reaction when John Doerr called for your impeachment before the House Judiciary Committee and the hearings were set for the 24th of July?
Well, what had happened, of course, was that the day before John Doerr made what I understood from reports was a masterful request for and advocacy of my impeachment. This was all, of course, in closed session. Our own attorney, James St. Clair, who was supposed to be a very fine lawyer, had made what we had heard was a very eloquent defense. But what concerned me was that when he made that defense, the committee then took a vote and denied him the opportunity to make his defense on television. I knew then that we were in deep trouble because it was the public opinion that would affect the Congress if it got close. Once I heard about Doerr, I knew that things were moving along. That gut reaction that I'd had, I said, this fellow is awfully good. I don't know how we're going to be able to stand up against this juggernaut. It was just rolling toward us, and there was nothing we could do to stop it.
Did you ever feel, given the weight of numbers, that it was a Democratic-controlled Congress, that you could actually defeat impeachment in the House Judiciary Committee? Was that ever a real option?
Oh, yes, there was an option, but not of defeating it, but of not losing it in a way that we would lose in the House. Let me explain exactly how it would have worked. The Democrats had a majority in the House, as we all know. We had only 190 Republicans. On the other hand, we could always count on, assuming even we had some Republican defections, which I expected, not many, but some, we could always count on 50 Southern Democrats, what I call the Joe Waggoner group, conservative Southerners who stood with me on Vietnam and all the other critical issues. Now, in this case, however, with the Judiciary Committee voting, members of the House, I knew from experience, usually voted the way that the members of the Judiciary Committee or any other committee voted in committee. In other words, if you had, for example, a member of the House from Alabama, he would be very greatly swayed in his vote by how the member of the House on the Judiciary Committee from Alabama recommended that he vote. So under the circumstances, Joe Waggoner told me flat out, and he was all for us. He said, if we can get just even one vote, we hope to get 3 Southern Democrats, but if we can get just one, we can still give you enough Democratic votes to avoid the House voting impeachment, the full House. If, however, we lose all, there's no way.
All 3.
That's right. If we lose all 3 of the Southern Democrats, there's no way that I can hold more than 30 or 35. So it was right down to that count. And when I heard about Doerr's argument, I thought, well, it's going to be tough for any of those Democrats to stand up against that kind of eloquence.
Did they?
Come to that later.
Okay. I have a, when you...
After I heard that, incidentally, I did a lot of soul searching, and on occasion, as now known, I would dictate very late at night, usually 11, 12 o'clock, a diary note. They were never transcribed, incidentally, at the time. They were transcribed only after I began working on my memoirs. But I recall particularly the diary note that I wrote then. I reread it recently, and it indicated a mood which was, to an extent, almost resigned to defeat, but on the other hand, held out just a smidgen of hope.
In fact, you quoted in your memoirs. I have a copy if you'd read it.
Yes. I intend to live the next week without dying the death of 1,000 cuts. This has been my philosophy throughout my political life. Cowards die 1,000 deaths. Brave men die only once. I suppose it could be said that this is our 7th crisis in spades, because the next month will be as hard a month as we will ever go through. But we can only be sustained by 2 things. One, the belief that we're right. We are fighting, as all agree, an assault on our entire system of government. And second, we will be sustained by the fact that at the end it will be over. And even if it is over in the terms of an impeachment, we will just have to live with that. By this time next week, we may have both the court and the committee vote. We can only hope for the best, plan for the worst.
Did the worst happen in terms of the support of the 3 Southern Democrats on the Judiciary Committee?
It happened certainly very dramatically. But I would say that in order to get the feeling of that particular day that it happened, it's well to put the whole day into context. It was July the 23rd. I went over to the office that morning, and we got a report out of Washington, a very disturbing one, not about Democrats, but about a Republican. Larry Hogan of Maryland was running for governor of Maryland in a primary. His campaign wasn't getting off the ground. We had counted on him. He was a conservative Republican. But he had announced at an emotional press conference that he was going to vote for impeachment. He was a member of the Judiciary Committee. Well, that shook me. Now, our people in Washington say that they tried to make me feel better by saying that everybody was jumping on him for being so political. But I knew better. His colleagues in the House, watching what Larry was doing when he was down at the grassroots running for governor, would say, well, if Nixon's a liability to him, we better watch out. He might be a liability to us. So I was worried about that. Not because he had defected, but because others would be influenced by the reasons he might have defected. Then came the afternoon, and then the real shocker came in. Bill Timmons, who was the head of our legislative group, called in. He said that we had lost all 3 Southern Democrats. I don't know that I was particularly surprised, because I had sensed that things weren't going right. But then Al Haig came in, and he said, you know, we've just had a message from one of Wallace's people saying that George Wallace might be able to influence Congressman Flowers, who's from the state of Alabama, on the Judiciary Committee. And if you'd call him, maybe that would do it, because he has great affection for you and respect and so forth. Well, I decided to call him. So at 3 o'clock, I picked up the phone. Operator got him in Montgomery, Alabama. He said at first it was very difficult for him to hear me. And finally, when the connection came through, he said, well, he hadn't had a chance really to study this whole matter. He said, I'm praying for you. He says, I am very much sorry. I'm very sorry that this ordeal had to be brought upon you. But I don't feel that I can really talk to Flowers because he might resent my doing so. If I change my mind, however, I'll let you know. The call had taken only 6.5 minutes, but as I hung up the phone, I knew it was all over. I turned to Al Haig. I said, well, there goes the presidency. That night, incidentally, I put it in writing. I worked till after 2 a.m. in the morning on a speech on the economy, my last major substantive speech as president, that I was giving in Los Angeles the next day. And at the top of my outline of that speech text, I wrote, lowest day of the presidency. But it wasn't the lowest day. The worst was yet to come. The next morning, understandably, I didn't wake up in my usual early hour. About 9 o'clock, I woke up, I called the office and asked Al Haig how things were going. This was really the first time in this whole period that he sounded really down. He said, well, not good. He said, the Supreme Court has just come down with a decision. It's 9-0, no error in it whatever. We have to comply. So we decided we had to comply. So under the circumstances then,
This was a decision about having to turn over tapes to the special
right.
prosecutor?
What had happened was special prosecutor wanted not only 64 tapes, but even more than that. We had resisted that. We felt that that was going too far. There was a fishing expedition, and the court held against us.
Wasn't the June 23rd, 1972 tape, the smoking gun tape, among these 74?
It was.
And you knew that?
It was. That's right. And I told Haig of my concern. I had told him about it before. I told him of my concern, and we both thought that Fred Bazard, our lawyer, should listen to it. He listened to it. He was concerned about it. He called back and told Haig that he thought it would be very hard to explain it and so forth, having in mind the fact that the only mitigating, and it was a very substantial mitigating factor, was that 2 weeks later I had said, go forward with your investigation, since the CIA had indicated that it was not concerned about the investigation revealing any of its operations. So I said to Al Haig when we got that word, well, it looks pretty bad. He says, no, we can cope with that. He was a strong man. But of course we couldn't and didn't. I should point out, however, that it was not the June 23rd tape that brought me down, because the very next day, before the tape had ever been made public, before it was made public, I was swimming in the Pacific at a beach. As a matter of fact, it's called the Red Beach. It's the Marine Corps landing beach where they practice their amphibious landing, one of the great beaches of the world. And when I came in, and the phone rang in the trailer in which I was changing my clothes, and I put on my windbreaker with the presidential seal on, picked up the phone, and Ron Ziegler informed me that the Judiciary Committee had voted, as I had expected then, by a margin, with all 3 Southern Democrats voting for impeachment. That meant, in other words, there was no question that the full House would vote for impeachment. I didn't have any particular feeling about it, though. I was prepared for it. I expected it.
You didn't, you had to have some
No,
feeling.
if it had been a surprise, I'd have had a feeling in the pit of my stomach. But you see, I didn't have any feeling about it because the situation is in a case like that is, and I must say that, let me explain how I operate. I always believe you must prepare yourself for the worst. Then when it comes, you don't get a shock from it. I knew the numbers. After all, I'd served in the House. I had worked with the House in 8 years as vice president. I'd worked with them out of office, in office. I knew how they'd operate. I knew the minute that Wallace call was finished, it was all over. And and Al Haig, when he said, we can cope with this, and I said, well, in a way, only if there's a miracle. But you know something about miracles in politics. Miracles don't happen in politics. They don't happen unless you make them happen. I'd made a miracle happen when I saved myself in the fund controversy way back in 1953. I made a miracle happen after losing for president and losing for governor and reading off the press by coming back. But now there was nothing that I could do to make that miracle happen. It was reminded me of something that Tricia once said about the whole Watergate business. It was like trench warfare in World War I. Charge after charge over the top. Thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions dying. Only a few yards gained and then lost. And that was the way it was with us with Watergate. We couldn't gain anything. No matter what we did, there wasn't going to be a miracle. We couldn't make one happen.
So as you flew back to Washington from San Clemente, you had no hope whatever that you would survive as president for more than a matter of days or weeks or months at most?
From the 23rd of August on, I knew
of July.
Sorry. From the 23rd of July on, I knew that we could not survive. However, when I got back to Washington, in my usual methodical way, people think it's methodical, and I guess it is, I decided I should put down the pros and cons of what options I had. And I had a sheet of paper on that which refreshed my memory. Rather interesting when I read it today so many years later. It indicated, 1, I could resign now. 2, I could wait until the House voted impeachment and resign then. Or 3, I could, despite the House voting impeachment, go to trial in the Senate, which would take about 6 months. Now, resigning now was the option I didn't want to do above everything else, personally. I'm a fighter. I just didn't want to quit. Also, I thought it would be an admission of guilt, which of course it was. And also, I felt that it would set a terribly bad precedent for the future. I hope no other president ever resigns under any circumstances. The second option was no option at all, to wait until the House voted impeachment, because what I would do then would be to put all of my good supporters on the spot and make them vote for impeachment, which they didn't want to do. You don't put them through that sort of thing. The third option, go through the Senate with a hearing, a trial, I should say, for 6 months. I knew that that was unacceptable. Unacceptable because from the standpoint of the country couldn't afford to have a crippled, half-time president. Particularly in this time when I recalled that in 1973, when things weren't as bad as they were now, the Soviet Union at that time was very difficult during that 73 war in the Mideast. I just couldn't risk it, I felt. So after making those notes, I, in my own mind, decided, well, there's no choice. And so the next day, on the first day of August, this was a week before I finally made my resignation speech, I got in Haig and Ziegler and I told them that I felt that there was no choice but to resign. Haig felt that under the circumstances that I probably should resign right away and leave town before the June 23rd tape came out. Well, first, I just wasn't going to go skulking away like that. And Ziegler strongly recommended I should take the time over the weekend to inform the family and also to see what the reaction to the tape was. I didn't have any hope about the reaction because I didn't feel that they would see it in the context that I felt it ought to be seen in. But that's what we finally decided to do.
Some people, including people very close in your inner circle, later felt that General Haig was orchestrating your departure from at least this point, if not before. Do you see the fact that when you told him you were going to resign and were going to wait a couple of days to do it, and he suggested doing it right away, do you see that as supporting that theory at all?
Some of my very close friends feel that. I don't agree with them. I never felt that he was orchestrating it. I think all he orchestrated was the resignation when he knew that I was going to resign. And I think it was very clear on the 1st of August that the decision had been made. He knew that. And from then on, he felt he was carrying out my wishes. And if he orchestrated that, he was doing something that was very proper indeed.
Did you tell your family that you had decided to resign as early as the 1st of August?
Not till the next day. That, of course, is the most difficult thing to do of all. That night, this is the night that I told Haig and Ziegler that the decision had been made. Bibi Rebozo came up from Florida. I went out in the Sequoia with him. I told him, and I've never seen him. He's rather swarthy in complexion anyway with his Spanish background, and he just turns white. He said, "You can't do it. You can't do it for the good of the country," and so forth. I said, "Well, you've got to help me with the family." And then, so the next day, I had to tell the family. It was a painful day. I remember going over to the White House in the evening, and I was sitting in the Lincoln sitting room, reading a few things, working on some correspondence and other things that simply had piled up and had to be acted upon. And Tricia came into the room. And I remember when she came in, it sort of reminded me of other times she'd come in. She had a way during the years before she was married of sometimes just coming in the room when I would be working or reading there and just sitting. She wouldn't talk, she wouldn't say anything. We kind of communicated in silence. That was her way, and it was mine. She just wanted to be near me when things were good or, as a matter of fact, when they were tough. And so she came in and I said, "Well, I decided that we're going to have to resign for the good of the country." And I said, she interrupted me. She says, "For the good of the country, you must not resign." She's pretty firm, despite her rather fragile, frail appearance. And after I said, "No, I'm afraid it has to be done." And then, unlike Julie, she has a very great problem controlling her. She has no problem in controlling her emotions. She controls them very well. And she sort of got up, And she came over to me, put her arms around me, kissed me on the forehead, tears coming into her eyes, and she said, "You're the most decent man I've ever known." And I said, "Well, I just hope I haven't let you down." But I knew I had.
I think we'll break for lunch now.
Well, that went fairly fast.
Okay.
I will. Yes. No, I'm going to ask that first.
Now?
But, yes, first. But then we'll pick up with
With the Lincoln,
the
yeah.
family.
And then the family.
You talk about the media's vested interest in bringing you down, that they had reached a point of no return where they had to bring you down or suffer terrible embarrassment themselves. How strong is the media, really, in the final analysis? Can it accomplish something like bringing a president down?
Oh, yes. The media is very strong.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. The spot on the president's right lapel.
Which way?
There's a spot on your right lapel.
Yeah, that's right. Right there.
No, it needs wet.
Now, I need moisture.
Did that get it?
That's it. Good. That's all. Keep going.
Got moisture.
Let's take it from the top. Here we go. Move down. Go to 2. Change your lights back.
You talk about the media having a vested interest in your impeachment and events having reached a point of no return where unless you were impeached, they were going to look very bad. In the final analysis, how important, how powerful is the American media? Do they have the power to bring down a president that they don't like?
Much more power than most people would like to think. I think we have to understand no, let's start this again. Well, they have much more power than most people would like to think. When we think of the media in this country, the problem is that they have a sense of self-righteousness, a double standard on issue after issue after issue. They can find everything wrong with somebody else, but they will not look inside and ever admit that they could be wrong themselves. And what was involved here in the Watergate thing was the unfairness of it. Oh, there was a legitimate thing to investigate, but they refused to balance it. They allowed their advocacy to get ahead of their reporting, which is their job to do. You know, President Eisenhower in his farewell address wrote about and warned against the power of the military-industrial complex. I didn't get a chance to make a farewell address, but when I get old enough and decide to retire, and I'm not planning it at the moment, but when I get that old, if I make a farewell address, I think I would warn against the media elitist complex. You know, the media is always talking about the imperial presidency, the power of the imperial presidency. I think we ought to hear a little bit of discussion of the imperial media and its power. You see, presidential power is limited by the courts, limited by the Congress. The media's power is unlimited. And some would say, but what about libel suits? Forget it. After the Supreme Court's decision in Sullivan versus New York Times a few years ago, A public figure cannot collect in a libel suit against newspaper or television unless he can prove malice. And there's no way that that's going to be possible.
Isn't the media
So I would say that as far as the media is concerned, all we can hope from them, if they're going to be responsible, is self-analysis, self-criticism, and some of them are trying with their ombudsman and the rest. The other thing is competition. But what we see in terms of newspapers across the country is more and more places where there's only one paper. Take Washington, D.C. Since the Star left the scene, the Washington Post is the only major newspaper being printed in the most important capital in the world. I wouldn't like to leave the fate of this country to the editors of the Washington Post.
Do you think that the First Amendment has been misused or abused by reporters?
Oh, no question about it. It's used basically as a license. Let's face it, Sullivan versus New York Times is in effect a license to lie because they can tell an untruth, print an untruth, which some of them consciously do if it's going to sell newspapers or what have you, or win a prize. And then they can always get behind the barrier under that case of saying, well, I didn't intend any malice. I had no malice.
That's a terribly cynical approach, though, to people who are doing their best, who are going to work, who are maybe trying to sell papers, certainly, but are trying to tell the truth.
Let me say right at the outset of this conversation, I made it clear that I was not speaking personally. I was not speaking generally. I'm simply speaking of what I have found to be an unfortunate majority at the present time. I think it could change. There are a lot of very good, responsible reporters, particularly in the writing press. Not yet that much in television, because television is so consumed with ratings and the rest. They'll do almost anything to get a story.
Do you count Woodward and Bernstein among the, or in which of the two camps of reporters do you count Woodward and Bernstein?
Well, it'd be obviously where I would count them. I think that their reporting, I have not read their book, but from those that were interviewed and then misquoted in their books, I say that it was not that responsible. It was advocacy journalism.
Is there any way to get some kind of a handle on this situation? Should the media be investigated? Should it be controlled?
No, I may disagree, for example, with what some president does with his power, but I don't want to abolish the presidency, or I don't want to control it. The same is true of the press. I believe in a free press. I do not want government control under any circumstances or government censorship of either radio, television, or newspapers. But I'm simply suggesting here that all of the media should look within themselves, look through that microscope at themselves, look in the mirror now and then, rather than looking out there to others.
Do you think there was or is a deep throat?
I haven't the slightest idea. I read in newspaper accounts the speculation about this one or that one. They even thought Al Haig was deep throat. That's ridiculous, of course. And if all the charges are as ridiculous as that, I would gather it was probably a composite. In other words, it might have been simply a fictitious character that they had to use in order to give more credibility to what they were trying to report.
In terms of the enormous credibility and fascination that Deep Throat assumed as a result of that reporting, if it is in fact a composite, or if he doesn't exist at all, is that a serious abuse of, or how serious an abuse of journalistic power is that?
It's a terribly serious abuse. It's making something up. It is starting with the point of view and then developing the facts, the fiction, in other words, to make the point of view survive. In other words, it's basically making fact out of fiction. That's wrong.
Do you think that without the character of Deep Throat, the Watergate story would have built and continued to build the way it did?
It might have, because as I said, while they stuck the knife in and twisted it pretty good, we gave the knife to them. So under the circumstances, that could have happened. On the other hand, there's no question, but that kind of reporting, with the enormous credibility that people gave to it, that here was a sinister individual, an inside mole, who was reporting to the newspapers and so forth and giving them all the scoop, that made it appear all very credible.
You've described, you've said that Mrs. Nixon was reading the book, or excerpts from the Woodward Bernstein book, The Final Days, when she had her stroke, or you've been reported as saying that. Is that true?
Oh, yes.
Do you see any cause and effect there?
I couldn't give a medical opinion, but my gut reaction is that it had an enormous impact. Certainly, as far as I'm concerned, I have nothing but contempt for them.
You've described your daughter Tricia, in the Lincoln sitting room that night. How did Mrs. Nixon learn about, and how did she react to your decision to resign?
Well, the way she learned about it was through B.B. and Rose Woods. We thought that it was important that everybody concerned, if possible, get the word and be able to think about it before we all got together. And so she came down. We all met in the Lincoln sitting room, as I recall. She came down with Tricia, Julie, Eddie Cox, and David. And I had the 23rd tape transcript brought over because I thought that it was important that they see just what the problems were, because that was causing concern. Let me say, had there not been the 23rd tape transcript, we would have still had to resign, due to the fact that before that transcript ever was made public, as we know, the 3 Democrats had been lost on the committee. But nevertheless, this was the final blow, the final nail in the coffin, although you don't need another nail if you're already in the coffin, which we were. And so they read it, they thought about it. Eddie and David are both lawyers, as you know, and they said, well, it depends on how you ascribe the motives. And they made the point, which I tried to make too, that what I did 2 weeks later indicated that while at the time we were trying to get the CIA to at least try to stop the FBI's investigation, that at a later point I made it clear that if there were no CIA concerns, that then the FBI should go forward. But nevertheless, they realized it was a problem. I then indicated to all concerned that I felt that I had no choice but to resign. And I said, I have to resign for the good of the country. And Eddie Cox made a very interesting observation. He said, no, he said, you've got to realize that today the most important function a president has in the field of foreign policy. And even though you would be crippled, agreed, and could serve only half time, with your experience, that would be better than having Ford. He felt Ford was very competent, but he said he had no experience, or not as much experience in foreign policy. And then I went on to say, well, but you'll have Kissinger, he'll be there. He says, look, Kissinger's brilliant, but mark my word, unless he has somebody with him who knows as much as he does and will back him up, he won't be as effective. Well, under the circumstances, that sort of finished that subject. We decided to think it over and go to Camp David for the weekend.
How did Mrs. Nixon react during this when she learned of your decision?
She was very quiet about it, listening to the others, which she usually does. But she came down very emphatically against resigning. I mean, we have to remember that during the fund crisis, I was the one that felt that, well, I ought to give my resignation to Eisenhower. And she said, you can't do it. So you can't do it because of its effects on the children. You can't do it because Eisenhower lose the election. He says, these people are just dumb who think that if he does this to you, that they're going to be able to survive and get your supporters to support them in the final campaign. And on this occasion, she was a fighter to the last. She was the last to give up. She was the last to give up in the fund thing, the last to give up in 1960, and she was the last to give up this time. Very hard for her.
It must have been a very eerie weekend at Camp David with all of you there with this enormous thing hanging over you, knowing that the decision had been made.
It was an eerie weekend. Well, we saw a movie and we took a walk on the paths up there. And
do you remember what the movie was?
I don't remember the movie, no. I didn't much care for the movies. They were just a good way to relax. It wasn't Patton. It was something else. I think something that one of the girls had picked. I remember I went for the swim in the pool, and there's a sauna right next to it, and Eddie Cox was in the sauna with me. And he took that place because we weren't discussing it out in the room there. We wanted to sort of make it a pleasant last weekend. We thought it was going to be that. Eddie Cox says this, I want to tell you again, I know you made this decision, but he says, I want to tell you that I know these people that are after you. And you've got to be sure that you realize what you're up against. He says, there's only one thing for you to do. And I said, what is it? He says, fight them, fight them, fight them.
When you went back to Washington on the Monday, the transcript for the June 23rd tape, the smoking gun tape, was released. What was the reaction?
Well, I should point out that before it was released, a statement had been made, which Ray Price, who had started work on the resignation speech on Thursday, and then I turned him off to do this work. He had worked on a statement on this, and Jim St. Clair and the other lawyers had been up to get a statement out accompanying the tape. Well, Al Haig brought that to me the last day at Camp David to look at it. When I saw the statement, I was really almost horrified because it made a very good case for the lawyers, which it should, saying they were not informed of this prior to the time they made their presentation to the committee. But it made a very poor case for me, their client, by not emphasizing, as I thought, enough what I had done 2 weeks later. I mentioned this to Al Haig, and I'd written out a few words to correct it, and for the first time he got a little abrupt with me, and I understand why. He said, nope, he said, we can't do a thing more with it. If we don't take it just the way they fixed it, they're going to jump ship. I said, well, the hell with it. Let them write anything they want. I made my decision anyway. So when we got back to Washington, he knew the decision was made, as he'd known it before. And we decided that night to go out for one last ride on the Sequoia. That also was a rather eerie ride, I may say. We talked about everything but what Tricia has called, quote, the subject, end quote. We talked about movies that Julie had seen with David. I don't even remember what it was. We talked about how Rose was, who she was with us during these last days, how she was handling some impertinent inquiries from the press in her usual very effective way. And so the evening ended rather pleasantly, and I went down below to stretch out, because I'd had a pretty hard weekend, I thought, thinking about all these things. Rose took the call from Al Haig with regard to the reaction to the tape, and she came into the bedroom down below where I was stretched out, and she read from her shorthand notes. It's about as we expected. I kind of winced as some of the names were read off of those that had left now, left my support. I understood it, but I felt, I looked back to the times I've campaigned for them and worked for them and supported them and written them, and kind of tough, although I did understand it. Didn't hold it against them. And, but then she read off that the cabinet, however, was standing firm for the most part, and then she left the room. And so I just turned off the light and closed my eyes.
At the cabinet meeting the next morning, you told the assembled cabinet on the Tuesday morning that you weren't going to resign. Why did you do that? Had you changed your mind?
No, I told them quite deliberately. I knew the cabinet well. I knew from what I had heard from Al Haig and others that some of them felt that they would like an opportunity to present their views and, in effect, to lobby me to make a decision in that way. I respected the cabinet, but I wasn't about to allow them to get me to resign. It had to be my own decision, taken in my own way at the right time. That was one reason. I didn't want to give them that opportunity. The second reason was even more important, however. I could not afford a leak. There couldn't be a period of even 48 hours, because the resignation couldn't take place, I knew, in at least a couple of days, in which it was known that I was going to resign. And I knew that as far as the cabinet was concerned, as good as they were, that there'd be a leak out of there in that big a meeting. I know that many of them probably didn't appreciate the fact that I didn't tell them, just as many of them didn't appreciate it when I didn't tell them I was going to China. But on the other hand, there are times when you have to keep your counsel, and I felt that this was one of those times. I regretted it because I would like to have told them, but I didn't think it was the proper thing to do. Right after the cabinet meeting, I asked Henry to come in, and I told him, of course, because we had to inform foreign governments and all that sort of thing. He said, well, he supported the decision, he regretted it, but he simply, it just wasn't, it was asking too much to ask me to be dishonored, as he put it, by having to go to trial for 6 months before the Senate.
Had you told Vice President Ford or informed him that the decision was imminent and that he might become president on very short notice?
Yes, that he was kept informed throughout, not by me, but by Haig. And then after this particular day, I, of course, by telephone, discussed the matter with him.
Are you aware that after this cabinet meeting, Secretary of Defense Schlesinger went back to the Pentagon and met with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and then issued an order that no alert or alert of American forces could be declared without his counter-signature, and he's since said it was because, or it's since been said that he said, it was because he feared your stability and that you would either use a foreign crisis to maintain yourself in office or that you would use domestic troops in order to retain yourself in office, in effect a coup.
Incredible.
Why did he think that, though?
I don't know. I don't know. I have great respect for him. I appointed him to several very important positions, as everybody knows. But I can't understand why he would do that, because that just isn't the way I'd operate. There was nothing in my mind whatever like that. I had made the decision, actually, to resign on the 23rd of August. It was just a question of, frankly, programming it the right way.
Does it frighten you that for 3 days, although you didn't know it, if for some reason you had had to declare an alert, it wouldn't have happened because of the intervention of this order?
Oh, I think it would have happened. Weakened as I was then, let me say, I had handled Schlesinger before when he didn't want to send the planes to Israel. And I said, look, you send them. Send everything that flies, damn it. And he did. And in this case, I would have shaken him up pretty damn good. I'm glad it wasn't necessary.
When did you inform General Haig that you had actually reached the decision?
The afternoon after the cabinet meeting, I had Haig and Ziegler come over, and I said, well, the things are moving very fast now. I think that we should do it on Thursday. And I then proceeded to give several suggestions with regard to the content of the resignation speech, passed them on to Ray Price. Things were moving very fast.
This was on the Tuesday afternoon?
This was the Tuesday afternoon. And I said to General Haig that I would resign, but it would be with dignity and with no rancor. And he said, you will be as worthy, your exit, he said, will be as worthy as your opponents are unworthy. And then I thought a minute and I said, well, Al, I really screwed it up, didn't I? He didn't have to answer.
What was the family dinner like that night, Tuesday night?
Very quiet. We didn't talk that much about the situation. Let me say Mrs. Nixon was very perceptive, however. I learned later that after our night on the Sequoia, that even though they hadn't been officially told that the decision was final, she had started to sort the clothes and start the packing. Incidentally, for 3 days, from Monday night until we left on Friday morning, she didn't sleep at all, packing 5.5 years of clothes and other mementos preparatory to leaving. With us, sometimes, as it is between people that are very close, you don't have to say it publicly or even privately. Things unspoken say it even more strongly.
That night, after you had been working in the Lincoln sitting room, you got back to your room, and as you write in your memoirs, there was a note on your pillow.
Well, as a matter of fact, even more interesting, I did another amusing point. Monday night, after we got back from the ride on the Sequoia, I just couldn't sleep, and understandably, I guess. And so I went down to the Lincoln sitting room about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I lit a fire. It was the middle of the summer, but the air conditioning was on. I always lit fires in the middle of August, didn't matter. And I sat back, the lights off, enjoying the fire, and 2 men burst into the room wearing overalls and so forth. They said, the fire alarm has gone off. Apparently I had not opened the ventilator so the smoke was out. And so they fixed it and fumbled around and so forth and so on, and they started to leave the room. And the younger one of the two sort of turned rather deferentially, said, "Mr. President, we just want you to know we're praying for you." Then after the Tuesday night dinner, which was family dinner, and Mrs. Nixon made it very pleasant for us and had the dogs come in and do their usual begging at the White House table and so forth, and we joked about that. But she too, like me, she'd had a lot of practice going through crises, knew how to handle it. And then I worked again in the Lincoln sitting room, working on my resignation speech then, until very late. Julie hadn't been there at dinner because she had to be out with a celebration that David's parents were having. I got back into my room and there was a note on my pillow.
You've reprinted in your memoirs. I have a copy, if you would read it.
She often wrote me notes and she'd leave them around. Said, "Daddy, I love you. Whatever you do, I will support. I'm very proud of you. Please wait a week or even 10 days before you make this decision. Go through the fire just a little bit longer. You are so strong. I love you." Signed, Julie. And then a P.S. Millions support you. Like her mother, she was a fighter. If anything would have changed my mind, believe me, that would have done it. But it was too late.
Didn't your family, in fact, continue to argue even the next day against
Oh, yes.
the resignation?
The following
or
day,
at least against doing it so soon?
Against doing it at all, as a matter of fact. They wanted me to delay, to take the heat a little longer, but they felt that in any event it was the wrong thing to do, wrong for the country as well as for myself personally. David and Eddie came in the next day. They were among the first visitors. It was a very busy day, the Wednesday before my last full day as president. And I mentioned to David the point that I'd made about the party, because I knew he was very interested in politics. And I said, "You know, I've got to do this for the party because I'm a liability." And he said, "You don't owe the party a damn thing." He said, "That's the way Grandpa thought, and that's the way you should think." He said, "After all, you rescued the party from oblivion after 1964. You ran way ahead of them in 1972. You do what's best for you and what's best for the country." And Eddie Cox had a little different approach. He made the point that it was vitally important for me to continue in office because of the foreign policy considerations. There's something else there.
The tragedy.
Yeah. Sorry. And then Eddie Cox came in right after him. Boy, these two boys, they're going to be great advocates if they ever get before a jury. He said that that came back to the theme that he had started at Camp David about those that were in the special prosecutor's office. He says, "Look, I know these people. I went to Harvard with some of them. I served with some of them in the New York Attorney's Office after I graduated from Harvard." He says, "They're very smart, they're very tough, and they hate you. They hate you with a passion. If you resign, they're not going to let up on you. They will harass you and hound you for the rest of the days of your life." I didn't know what to say. I said, "Well, it's kind of like the Greek tragedy." I said, "If it stops in the middle of the second act, the audience throws chairs onto the stage, and all you have to do is to recognize that whatever the outcome, you've got to see it through to the end." But I was very proud of the way they presented their case.
A lot of people feel strongly that one of the most serious crimes of Watergate, in a way, was a crime of the heart, and it was that you let Julie go out and continue to defend you after you must have known that your case was indefensible. Do you have a feeling about that?
I was frankly not as aware of that as many people would think. I wasn't reading the news summaries at that time, and she never spoke to me about it. Frankly, if she had asked me whether she should go out, I would have told her not to do it.
This night, when the decision was finally irrevocable and people accepted it, although they didn't like it in your family, you had one last dinner, and you asked the White House photographer to be there. Why did you, as such a private person as yourself, how could you ask a photographer to be present, to intrude at this most intimate moment?
It certainly sounds uncharacteristic, but on the other hand, I should point out that Ollie Atkins we considered a friend. He had been with us for many, many years. He had taken pictures of the youngsters for the Saturday Evening Post when they were only that high. We all called him Ollie, and he called the kids by their first name and so forth and so on. The second thing was that I just had a feeling that it was important that the event be recorded. As I said to Tricia and Julie and Mrs. Nixon, I said, after all, there will come a time, years from now, when you will want to see what we went through. And so this is only for our private purposes. At least I thought it was private at that point.
As you know, nothing of that period was private, and we have the photographs. Can you describe some of them? There's one of you with Tricia in the rose garden.
The way that came about was that I got over to the residence after this rather long day, and which I had seen not only Eddie and David, but others as well, who came in to plead their case. I remember Rabbi Korf coming in. He's like an Old Testament prophet. He urged me to reconsider. He said that it would be a sin against history to allow these jackals in the media and this cabal in the Congress drive you from office. Don't do it, don't do it. And then another thing that really tore me right to my heartstrings was when Rose came in. She incidentally was wearing a pink dress. She always wore her pink dress when she wanted to be defiant to those that were our critics. And she said she just got a telephone call from Colonel Guy, one of the POWs. I think he'd been a POW for 5 years. She said he was in tears virtually. And he says, please tell him not to resign. Tell him he didn't give up on us, and we'll never give up on him. Pretty tough to listen to that and hang in to the other decision, but I had made it, and that was that. But anyway, when I arrived in the room, I knew that it was pretty tense. I can always tell with Mrs. Nixon. I remembered at the time of the fund when we were in Portland, just before going down to make the broadcast. She had a terrible, severe pain in her neck. She gets a pain in her neck and very stiff, went under tension. And this time I could see the throbbing. But when she saw me, she put on a great act. I guess it was an act. She got up and she came up and threw her arms around me, and she said, we're all very proud of you, Daddy. Well, I didn't know quite what to say, and Ollie, fortunately for me, for my emotions, stepped in and said, you know, I think it would be nice if we could get a picture of Mrs. Nixon and you in the rose garden. And she said, no, Ollie, that's too much. I just can't do it. And Tricia said, I'll go with you, Daddy. So I went down with Tricia to the rose garden. It was incidentally quite appropriate that she go, because we were able to think back to a happier time, 1971, 3 years before, when she and Eddie were married in the rose garden. We talked about that wedding. What a beautiful and wonderful occasion it was for all of us. And I must say, as I looked at Tricia, she was as beautiful, I think more so then and even now, than she was then. So then we went back upstairs. We had a bite to eat. Nobody was very hungry. I can't even remember what we had that night. It was good, but not sensational. Could have been sensational. We wouldn't have known. And then I felt that probably we ought to have a family picture, because our favorite White House picture had been of the whole family for formal purposes, distributed during the campaign. And so I...
Which was your favorite picture?
The favorite picture was of the whole family, where both couples and Mrs. Nixon and me, and either on either side. So I said I told Ollie that I would, that we would have the picture, and I put on somewhat of a false front and bravado and tried to arrange it in my usual way. You stand here, stand accordion-like so that you won't be cut out of the picture. And Ollie mercifully was quick because we were all uptight. Tears were brimming in virtually everybody's eyes. And then after he snapped that picture, Julie just couldn't hold in the tears any longer. She rushed over to me and threw her arms around me and said, "I love you so much, Daddy." Well, by that time, I couldn't say much either.
One of the most memorable and subsequently controversial events of these days was your meeting with Henry Kissinger that night, which ended in your praying with him in the Lincoln bedroom. Do you remember that night?
Oh, I remember it very well. And he remembers it very well, too, because he's written about it, as I have. What happened is that he came over, and we had to discuss the sending of messages to people around the world we dealt with. I wanted to assure them all that President Ford was a strong man, that he had my total confidence, and that he supported our foreign policy. And so we worked on some of those messages, and then we reminisced about some of the great events of the past. We reminisced, for example, about particularly the meeting in that very room 3 years before, when we got the message about the trip to China. And so I walked down the hall to the kitchen, and the same bottle of Courvoisier that we had toasted from 3 years ago when we got that historic news, I found there. Nobody had drunk anything out of it since then. I brought it back with a couple of snifter glasses, and we proposed the toast not just to the past, but to the future. I must say, we weren't quite as elated this time as we were. And Henry, in his rather gruff way, but very sincere way, he said, "If they continue to harass you," he said, "I will resign, and I will tell the reason why." And then I started to escort him out, and almost by emotion, right next to the Lincoln City Room is the Lincoln bedroom, which incidentally used to be the cabinet room at one point, or the office. And I said, "Henry, just wait a minute here." I said, "On special occasions in times past, for example, before we went to China, before I had a major speech or a major press conference, before we went to Russia, I would stop in this room and have a moment of silent prayer, because I just sort of gathered strength just from being in this room where Lincoln had been." And I asked him to join me, and we knelt quietly in the Quaker fashion for a couple of seconds, got up, I escorted him out. A few minutes later, I felt a little embarrassed about it because I thought he might have been embarrassed. And I called on the phone. I said, "Henry, you know that was a very private matter, and I hope it didn't embarrass you." He says, "Not at all." He said, "This isn't going to leak." Of course it did. I was not surprised.
Were you hurt?
Nope. I was beyond the point of being hurt then.
Later, after that meeting, Ron Ziegler came over to go over some of the details of the
Yes.
upcoming speech.
And then after
Do you
we
remember that?
that was now way past midnight. And as Ron was leaving, you know, he had been a loyal fellow and so forth and so on, and I sort of thought, you know, I've really never given him a tour of the upstairs. He'd seen it, of course, but I wanted him to see it through my eyes. So I had all the lights turned on in the Queen's bedroom, in the Lincoln bedroom, and in the yellow Oval Room, and so forth and so on. And I walked through the rooms and showed them all to him and explained a little about the history, and finally took him to the elevator. He seemed to be quite moved by it. And he just said simply, he said, "You've had a great presidency, sir."
On the morning of your last day as president, you met with Vice President Ford. What was that meeting like?
But tough for him, and tougher for me. We had worked together for many years. He came to the Congress only a year after I did. And we had fought in many good battles. We'd won most and lost some as well. I told him I thought the country would be in good hands. I told him that it was very important, I felt, for him to keep Henry Kissinger. He agreed. He said he thought we had a fine cabinet. And then, as we were leaving, I said, I'm going to tell you something. I said, I remember so well one of the last conversations I had with President Eisenhower. As a matter of fact, the last conversation I had with him before I was inaugurated. He called me on the phone. He said he wanted to wish me well. And then he went on to say, and his voice broke a bit when he said it, he said, you know, I have only one regret on this great day. This is the last time I can ever call you Dick, Mr. President. And I said, Jerry, this is the last time I'll call you Jerry, Mr. President. Brought a tear or two to his eyes. I think to mine too. We shook hands. He left.
Later in the day, General Haig and Ron Ziegler came in and had brought word of a meeting with the special prosecutor Jaworski, in which he had said that he thought you were making the right decision to resign, but that there would be no deals. How did you respond to that?
I don't think it was quite that there would be no deals. As a matter of fact, it was put in a way that he was implying that he would try to do what he could to see to it that there was no further prosecution or harassment and so forth. And based on the previous record, I didn't have much hope that he would accomplish anything. But what irritated me about it was that he apparently had coupled the two, that I was resigning so that he would lay off of me. I wasn't doing it for that. I sort of, uncharacteristically in that period in which I was trying to control emotions, I sort of blew my stack a little. And I said, suppose you go to prison. I said, after all, some of the greatest books have been written in prison. Look at Gandhi. Look at Lenin. I don't think either Lenin or Gandhi would appreciate it being coupled like that, but I did at that moment. Then afterwards, I said to Ron Ziegler, I said, Ron, I was beginning to be rather introspective at the moment. I said, how can you really support a quitter? You say, yeah, I know I've got weaknesses, but I've never been a quitter. So let me tell you what happened to me in my first year as a freshman in college. I went out for track. Wasn't fast enough and didn't have the wind enough to do too well, but I ran the mile. And I remember I was in a race, and I was running in last place. No way I could win it. But I wasn't about to be last. And I remember that I sprinted the last 50 yards and finished next to last. I just wasn't about to be a quitter.
Do you have any special recollections of the two meetings you had, one with the congressional leadership just before you went to make your resignation speech, one with the congressional leadership, and then one with your supporters from Congress in the cabinet room?
Well, the congressional leadership came over to see me in the EOB, and it was a very, shall I say, cool meeting, understandably so. I explained to them what I had intended to do. I expressed my appreciation for their understanding, for working with me. It was very brief because these were not particularly people that I was very close to.